Please welcome our next panel, Scott Gebicke, Byron Clayton, and Steve Willingham.
So the ARM Institute stands for the Advanced Robotics for Manufacturing. We are one of 14 institutes around the U.S. That focus on advanced manufacturing. We're technically manufacturing innovation institutes. Each institute is focused on a different area of advanced manufacturing. We are focused on robotics, and we're all funded by the federal government. And our purpose is to really help small and large manufacturers to compete better globally. The way we do that, and specifically for ARM, the way we do that is we fund technology and workforce development. And we do that with small, large companies, universities, nonprofits, et cetera. And we're also building a national ecosystem of innovators. And the idea is, as we fund these projects, we want to make sure that the ecosystem shares in the results of those projects.
I'm with Jabil. Jabil's a local manufacturer, and we like to say one of the biggest companies no one's ever heard of. Jabil operates a $25 billion company. We operate in 15 different end markets across 250 different customers. As of now, which changes every day, we have over 200,000 employees in 115 sites and over 50 million square feet of manufacturing. So the interest for me and sitting with Byron here is, what are the innovations in manufacturing? How can we make stuff better? How can we make stuff more efficient? And really excited to be here in the local community sharing these ideas.
My name is Steve Willingham. I'm the chairman of Foundation for Community-Driven Innovation here in Tampa. And we'll be opening an advanced manufacturing robotics center at the University Mall this summer. So for now, we actually have 3 questions that we'd like to present to our panel. The first, I'm actually going to throw out to Byron. And the question is, actually both of your organizations are very ingrained in the advancement of robotics and automation. What do you see as the major drivers of this, as well as the impact on organizations?
So there are obviously lots of factors, but it's interesting as we talk to people around the country, manufacturers around the country, what we hear most is what's driving automation and robotics in general. It's the level of competition that they're getting, and the fact that competition is global. So you're no longer competing against, the guy across the state, right? Now you're competing with the guy halfway across the world. And so the fierceness, the level, the scale, and the speed of this kind of competition is really driving people to automate. And the idea is, things like improving quality, reducing costs, cutting delivery times, things like that. Those are things that they need to do. Not only to grow, but just to sustain their operations. So while a lot of these folks really want to automate, they want to get efficient, and they want to compete better, they have to. And so that's what we hear most about, what's driving robotics and automation. And it impacts their companies on a number of different levels, mainly because the speed of competition, the speed of business right now, you can't rely on the C-suite to do all that change. Now, everybody in the organization really has to focus on change and innovation and reskilling and doing things better so that they can get better. So anyway, I don't care if you're an engineer, you're an accountant, you're sales and marketing, or you're a line worker. You need to continually upgrade your skills and understand how to use technology in order to do things better so your company can grow and thrive.
Jabil's an interesting company. We spent a large part of our business searching for cheaper places to manufacture and looking for cheaper labor rates. But what we found is automation really can achieve 3 things. One, and it goes back to the simple adage, cheaper, better, faster, right? So you really want to automate for one of 3 things. You automate for quality, to make something that's truly repeatable. You automate for cost, meaning automating for a way to make a product cheaper, and you automate for speed. And I think what we're seeing now is not just automation of processes, but what I'll call automation of human factors. So we're now automating things which still have people in the loop manufacturing. That could be heads-up displays that give technical specifications. That could be cameras that help people pick parts in a faster way. We're seeing that the level of automation and robotics doesn't necessarily have to replace the human being. It can actually enhance what they're doing. That means a human being is now more productive and, by the way, still employed, whereas historically robotics have replaced the human factor. So a lot of our advances are happening not just in the robotics and the automation, but in the hybrid of how do we make people and processes more efficient.
Excellent, fascinating. So moving into the area of additive manufacturing or 3D printing, it's gaining a lot of traction in startups and so on. And technology is changing so fast. How do you see the industry of additive manufacturing or 3D printing evolving?
Look, I think this is one of those things where technology in certain elements haven't changed that much in 100 years. So literally the piston of a combustion engine is probably made the same way fundamentally as it was 120 years ago. And now you've got, okay, can we build something from scratch inside an engine block that you never have to assemble? It's already pre-built. So it starts to change the constructs of things that have been in place for hundreds of years. I think there's a couple things. One is how that's innovating the way people design things. I think there's a lot of one of the markets you see this early adoption is in aerospace. In aerospace, the parts are so expensive and weight is such an issue. Mm-hmm. So the early adopters are going to be in areas like that. But to get this mass adoption, we really have to go all the way back to fundamentally how things are designed. And I think additive manufacturing in the mechanical engineering fields and the industrial engineering fields are going to completely change the way things are designed. And something that's assembled like a combustion engine may be completely 3D printed and never touch an assembly line, right? And so the robots that currently do that today would become obsolete. Mm-hmm. The real fascinating thing for how fast the technology changes is you think of a printer, and the simple analogy here is in two-dimensional printers we're all familiar with. There's the ink and there's the printer. Mm-hmm. Well, now that you have three dimensionals, you have a myriad of different alloys and products and metals and plastics that can be the quote-unquote ink, and you have several different methods of actually applying this and building this up. So the technology is changing on 2 dimensions rapidly. 3 dimensions rapidly, and understanding how you play with both of those is fascinating.
It is. The change and the different kinds of materials that can be used in additive is fascinating. Byron, what can you add to that from the robotics and manufacturing?
I was just going to say what Scott said.
Yeah, what he said.
So I'm going to show my age for a second here. I remember back in the 70s when people were talking about personal computers, right? And that wasn't, for some of us, that wasn't that long ago. And the thing is, people were talking about how everyone was going to have a personal computer, right? So think about now. I don't think I know anybody who doesn't have a desktop, laptop, or cell phone, right? And that's anybody over the age of 5 years old. And a couple of years from now, it's going to be anybody over 2 years old. So when I think about additive, I believe that just in a few years, everyone's going to have a 3D printer, and I mean everybody. I think with the advancements of things like, the different types of materials, and that's, inorganic materials, so plastic, metals, but also things like conductive materials. So, 3D printing of circuits. It's been around for years, but all that's going to improve. We have 3D printing of living tissue now. Mm-hmm. That's going to improve. The speed at which we can print is going to improve. One of the things that I think is really interesting are 2 things. Number one, and I think this is where the industry is going, it's the flexibility. So it's instead of just printing metal or plastic or whatever, the thing is we're going to be able to create very complex products because the machines themselves will be printing metals and plastics and circuits and all types of things. The other thing that I see is going to change is the scale. So right now, and this is most 3D printing machines today, not all, but most, what you'll see is things are printed about this big to maybe about this big, right? What you're going to see is the scale is going to change on both ends. So you're going to see more and more things at the micro scale, and some things exist today, but you're going to see things that you can barely see with your eye are going to be printed additively with 3D printers. On the other end of the spectrum, which is something that we're interested in at ARM, is you're going to also see massive products being printed. And these will be mobile robots that will be accurate enough to do this kind of printing. So over time, as we continue to improve the scale and the materials and the speed, et cetera, what you're going to see is this is going to translate into everybody's has a 3D printer, and I'm sure you've all heard about, instead of ordering something and have it shipped, they'll just send you a file and you'll print it on your 3D printer. That's the future.
You remind me of an interesting anecdote. I was doing some work looking at future trends, and we opened it by saying, one of the big races is what technology is going to happen faster, the printing of liver tissue or automation of vehicles. And those things are completely different. But if you think about it, car accidents supply about 100,000, 200,000 livers a year in terms of to cure against liver diseases. Mm-hmm. If car accidents go away, and theoretically they would drop dramatically with automation of travel, you now don't need another source of tissue. Right? So some of these things that you think are completely unconnected, like the ones you mentioned, actually heavily overlap when you think about the future world. It's interesting.
Yeah, fascinating. And interesting that it reminds me of last year I was at a trade show talking about materials being 3D printed. You have the plastics and the metals and so on, and I saw a food 3D printer. It was fascinating. Anyhow, okay, so what advice do you have for entrepreneurs and innovators, whether they be individuals or companies, to prepare to participate in these kinds of manufacturing innovations? Scott,
learning how to de-risk technology. So, and what I mean by that is if you need to innovate using advanced technologies in order to compete, in order to thrive, in order to grow, the next thing you want to do is to make sure you know how to de-risk it, how to cut down or how to improve your probability of success, right? Because from experience, I can tell you that how you implement technology is actually more important than what you implement. And think about, you've seen in the news, Tesla, for instance, had a hard time with automation. A lot of that had to do with how they were implementing. What manufacturers can learn and the advice I give them is to look at things like, how do I figure out which operation I even want to target for any kind of automation? How do I assess the solutions? How do I find the solutions? And how do I identify the best solution for what I have? How do I cost justify it accurately, right? So that I don't make mistakes and then buy something that doesn't pay for itself. What are the best practices for implementation and for buying? Who do I train? How do I train? Those are all things that will dramatically improve your chances of success. And so it's very important for companies to understand how to do that. So that's my biggest advice. And that's especially important for small and mid-sized companies because these companies can't absorb mistakes, or it's very difficult to absorb setbacks. So it's really important for these companies to increase their probability of success. So yeah, that's the advice that I would give.
Excellent.
In today's day and age, with the shift to software and apps and things like that, most entrepreneurship that I've seen is really focused on product. What's the product that we have? How is this product going to be better? And I think some of the things we celebrate are the products, the actual product. Whereas I think in things we're talking about, it's got to be about the people and the process. So if you're starting a small company and you want to operate in the 3D printing world or in the automation world, don't try to build your own robot. You're never going to compete against ABB or a Fanuc or something like that. I mean, the amount of money, and you know better than I do, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars of IP. Don't try to build a new robot. What you want to do is try to target on the niche of the process of designing for a robot. Or how would I take a product and how would I redesign this for 3D printing? How would I redesign it so it can be emailed to someone and printed using existing technology? So focus on the best people that know something about a certain things or changing the process, because if you focus on the product in this space, you're going to get crushed because there's no way you're going to be able to compete with the big players that are out there.
One of my favorite studies, and I read a lot of studies, and one of my favorite ones is by Deloitte. A couple of years ago, but they had interviewed hundreds of CEOs from around the world about a global manufacturing index, right? So what are the types of things that you think, has helped to make your company successful, and what types of things will improve that in the future? The number one thing, well, I'll say the number two thing was embracing technology, right? The number one thing was to develop, recruit, and retain talent. That was the number one thing, and that was across the board. Didn't depend what country you're in. That was across the board. So my other piece of advice would be focus on that talent. Make sure that you have a workforce that is willing and able to reskill and learn and apply what they're learning, because that's what's going to make the difference for you. And you can do that through developing it, and we've seen a lot of very successful companies do that by developing or participating in creative training programs and also creative recruiting practices as well.
Excellent. Whenever I talk to an entrepreneurial audience, and actually when I've gone to the various booths around in this event, the one question that I like to ask, and whether it be related to robotics or manufacturing or what have you, it's a fundamental question: what problem are you solving? And if you don't have an answer to that, be careful. Just be careful. You can trip. It's a fundamental question that once you do find the answer, you'll be able to make better decisions about whether you want to go through various forms of robotics, additive manufacturing, or what have you. That's the questions that I have. I thank you so much for participating. It's been very informative.
Thank you, Steve.
All righty.
Thank you, Steve.
Perfect.